We hope you saw part 1 of this video in Alesund and will join us here for even more of this great city. In part 2 of this video, we'll see history in Giske and Godoy Islands, explore the German occupation of Norway during World War II at the Bjornoya Kystfort, and we're also going to dive into immigration. Both of our guides, Knut and Ate, have really important stories to tell and really good perspective and lessons to teach about how a host country manages its newest residents, as well as how taxpayers feel about the services that they receive for what are considered to be some fairly high fees that they pay. You're watching Well Traveled Life with Jonathan and Jennifer. Let's get out of Alesund and see what's out there. In part 2 of this video, we'll take you to Giske and Godoy in the west and over to Bjornoya to the north of Alesund. Through a series of bridges and tunnels, it's relatively easy to get around to the islands outside of Alesund now, but it wasn't always that way. To get between Giske and Alesund was an expressly expensive venture. The local Viking king used to charge a toll for all sailors to pass, and in order to get from one island to another, you would have to pay that tax to get across.
The name was Mørejarl, King Mørejarl.
Giske lies opposite Alesund, so once you cross the bridge, you actually get great views back to the city. Alesund, Giske, and Godoy are all small islands and sit at the mouth of the Fjord. Giske is a mostly rural, very flat island. So flat, in fact, there's sort of a joke that a young man went skiing on the only hill on the island, and the headline was that he broke his hand, and nobody could believe it because it's too flat to ski and actually have a real accident. But it happened here on this one hill in Giske.
Skiing in Giske, broken.
I think this was an especially funny story for Knut, whose son is poised to be a world-class ski jumper. Crossing the bridge from Alesund over to the flat island of Giske, you sort of enter a quiet, small rural area where the streets are one way and the houses are charming and the birds are plentiful. A number of burial grounds have been discovered on the Giske Islands. On a small knoll overlooking the ocean lies the Miltehaugen mound. Miltehaugen is the oldest of the monumental burials in the Giske Islands. It has been dated to the early Bronze Age, between 17 and 1100 BC. In 1847, 8 stone cists were found next to each other on the mound. Each one measured about 60 by 120 centimeters. And when the covering slabs were lifted off, the landowner noticed that there were these carvings on the inside. The slabs were thin and they broke into several fragments. Most of the slabs were covered by patterned borders, which resembled woven textiles. Ships were sailing below those fringes. There is evidence of at least 10 ships, and according to a 2004 reconstruction, which was based on the information that they had received from the finder of these stones, they found that 2 large slabs that were 1 meter by 2 meters or more covered 4 trapezoidal stone cists each, and there would have been at least 10 images of ships for every cyst. The ship motif is found within rock art and other decorations from around the Bronze Age. It's a key symbol for understanding Bronze Age cosmology. The ship could refer to journeys to distant places. It's also depicted as pulling or carrying the sun, as a mythical vessel that makes the entire world go around. The ship turns darkness into light and night into day, winter into spring, and it brings new life to plants. So It would show us that regeneration might have been a central element for the burial grounds. Rock art in or near burial grounds isn't new, and it's not unique to this particular site. It's common in Scandinavia, but this is considered to be the largest collection of rock art in all of Norway. The Giske Church is a unique community theater.
This was a small theater where everybody in this island is actor, and that tells the story from the Viking time.
The earliest known records of the Giske Church date from 1309, but it is believed to have been built back in the 12th century and served as the private chapel for the Giske family estate, whose tombstones you can still see prominently displayed in the cemetery. The church is constructed of marble, which you wouldn't know because it has been covered on the exterior with chalk and on the interior with plaster. Giske is said to be the birthplace of Rollo, one of the major Viking kings who actually conquered Normandy and is an ancestor of William the Conqueror. Over the years, the church has had 2 major renovations and is still an active church today. The Giske Church is over 1,000 years old and houses a beautiful interior as well as the graves of a number of its native residents. Leaving Giske, we head over to the other island of Bjornoya. On our way to Alnes, we'll pass by the small shoreside warehouses that actually are storage areas and summer homes for people to enjoy for long weekends during the warmer months of the summer. Alnes is a small fishing village on the island, and the Alnes Lighthouse now is a quintessential lighthouse on the coast. But in its first iteration as a lighthouse in 1937, it was nothing more than a shack with 3 candles, and the fishermen would have to pay a tax to keep it running each year. When they finally stopped paying that tax, the lighthouse was closed. In 1867, accommodation was erected and a keeper was hired. In 1937, the current tower, which stands at 22.5 meters tall, was finally constructed. It used a method not typically used in Norway, which was to have a square foundation with angled bars and a wooden tower. For a fee, you can climb that lighthouse up to the top and get views out over the ocean and to an area which is a popular surfing site. An underground cafe and exhibit space gives you more information about the lighthouse and its history. Between Alesund, Giske and Godoy, we were able to take bridges and submarine tunnels. In order to get to Bjornoya Island, we had to go back inland and take the road around to the next northern island. We felt like we were driving these roads pretty regularly and got to know some particular landmarks, including the house with many windows. Knut had teased us that if we could name the number of window panes in the house, he'd give us a tour for free. Speaking of doing a tour, we had a private tour with Knut, who is a taxi driver, not necessarily a licensed guide. We paid Knut $450 for a full day's tour, and that included everything, as well as his companionship and good friendship. We had mentioned that Alesund sits at the mouth of the Fjord, and that's important because Fjord is one of the places you probably want to get to while you're in the area. Cruise ship access to Fjord is likely to be limited in the future, so you probably want to look at getting an electric ferry that will take you up the fjord to Geiranger. The Norwegians are tough, and even in these rugged areas, they would move cattle from a farm on this side of the fjord all the way across over to this side of the fjord, where they would then climb them up the mountain to the farm at the top of the fjord wall. The prolific flowers in pinks and purples along the side of the road are actually a weed, and they're invasive and not considered to be a friend to the environment. Kind of one of those lessons, not everything that looks good is good. Another one of the landmarks we were used to seeing was the ski jumps off to the side of the road. These were important because this is one of the places where Knut's son goes to practice. He's not even a teenager yet, and he's doing the longest of those jumps. Another landmark is the Old Church of Stordal, or the Rose Church. It's so named because the interior is painted with rose mailing. It is a very elaborate 18th century Renaissance painting that covers the walls, the columns, the crossbeams. Every inch of the interior of this church is painted. It is an octagonal wooden church and has been replaced by the new Church of Stordal, but is maintained as a museum. You'll pay your entrance fee and get tickets in this building off to the side. Sometimes a quick detour turns into an actual adventure. We needed a restroom, and it was a Sunday afternoon. The restrooms in Norway just aren't easy to find. Dennis, you have any suggestions on?
Well, we're really trying badly.
We
really
in
are.
An elevator. We walked up a zillion stairs up and down, trying to find our way out.
Yeah, but you know what? It's fun.
All part of the journey.
All fun.
Finally, Knut did find us a restroom in a pizza shop, but more importantly, they also had some really great local beer. What have you found here, Knut?
You can find me.
Since 1963, residents have been waiting for a good bridge to connect the islands to the mainland. This beer celebrates that bridge. Conceived on the islands and brewed on the mainland, it is the perfect local beer.
The Norwegian. You can see the local islands here. So this, all of them is connected with a new bridge. So it's close to 1 year ago. So now they are connected to the mainland. The guy that have the recipe is from the islands.
Produced there, but the name is from their own.
We had made our way up here to see the old German World War II fort at Bjornoya. Bjornoya translates to Bear Island. We didn't see any bears, but we did get a good sense of how quickly and completely the Germans had been able to take over this part of the world. A visit to the old German fort on Bjornoya gives you a good understanding of how the Germans were able to occupy Norway and maintain control throughout the war. Having seen the death and destruction visited upon countries who resisted, the Norwegian government had a relatively bloodless takeover by the German forces. And this fort that we're visiting is a good example of how quickly and completely they were able to gain control so that the areas were not available for Allied occupation. This map is a good depiction of the trail that rings the coastline, and all along it you will see the elements of the fort. Built in 1940, it took only 2 months to be built. This particular fort is a little bit hidden. We found a parking space, followed the signs, and walked out. You can't drive onto the fort grounds, but there are walking paths, and if you follow the paths, they will take you in a large circle all the way around the tip of this island, and you'll get to see each of the fort installations. We had the place to ourselves, and the desolation we encountered was almost jarring compared to the life that we know was lived and lost here. The location of this German bunker gave it perfect access to the ocean as well as to the land side. They had a communications office, garage, bunkers, food storage areas, and enough to keep them well stocked for long periods of time. The communications center, the writing house, was connected directly to the dock by tunnels or fortified trenches that were accessed by steep stairwells and vertical ladders. This appears to be a bunkhouse with numerous big dormitory-style bedroom-type areas. So these would have been living quarters. While the fort has been preserved, there has not been any money put into rebuilding it or restoring it. So you are really seeing it in whatever shape it has been left in. There aren't docents, there isn't a fee to get in. You'll get all of your information from the markers along the trail at each installation. With underground storage facilities and bunkers for a variety of types of weapons, as well as numerous platforms for firing cannons that were on rotating turrets, they had complete control of the coastline. as well as the roadway behind them. This was a self-sufficient command post with their tunnels and trenches, cisterns and well water, even a prison for Russian prisoners of war.
Russian war prisoners.
And plenty of coverage from all of the armaments positioned around the top of the knoll. Strategically set where cannons could be launched out to the sea and over the road, this gave the Germans a great vantage point, as well as complete domination over the area. We found a lot to love about Norway, and we want to talk through some of those things. Obviously, the waterfalls, nature, the fjords, all of that's easy. Who doesn't love that? But there's more to Norway than just the nature. They have done some really unique things in the form of governance and policy. We were pleasantly surprised to find that every taxi we saw was an electric car. Most of the cars that we saw on the road were electric powered at this point in time. And that has been true for a couple of years now. So we've been coming back to Norway for 2 years in a row and spending a fair amount of time, and we've seen electric cars only become more and more prevalent. But it's more than just electric cars. I think Norway has a reputation for being sort of homogenous, and so maybe they aren't having to deal with some of the other issues that other countries in the world are dealing with. And we didn't find that to be true. We actually found a fair amount of diversity, and we found almost everybody we spoke with had some kind of a story with regards to immigration. Knut is a Norwegian, born and bred, but he is married to a immigrant from Kenya. He tells the story of her coming over to Norway with nothing but 2 suitcases with all of her belongings. And they now have 3 children. Knut was formerly a chef at a Michelin star restaurant. Due to COVID, that job obviously went away, and he has come back driving a taxi, and that's how he has fortified his family. One of our other drivers was Ate. Ate is from Eritrea. He came to Norway as an immigrant with an asylum visa. He had a pretty remarkable story about a family member who was politically involved in Eritrea and ended up being taken out of the home in the middle of the night and not seen or heard from again. When Ate came of age at age 18, he applied for asylum, and Norway was the first country to grant that asylum and give him passage. So he talked a lot about his journey and what he was given when he came to Norway. So the first thing he talks about, he was given housing, he was given education, he was given a stipend or an allowance to live on. Now there were some responsibilities he had as well. He was required to learn the language, which meant he had to go to school and pass tests for the language, and he was encouraged to obviously find a job, but that really was supposed to come after he'd had some time to assimilate, learn the language, and learn some skills. Ate was sort of a go-getter, and he was given 3 years to accomplish all of these goals. He did them all in 1 year. He got his advanced language certification. He also passed all of his citizenship tests. He had gotten a job in a fish processing factory. That's really hard work. These are probably the kinds of jobs that a lot of the Norwegians may not want to do. Knut talked about his wife also working in a fish processing plant, and that her family that would come over would get work visas to work in agricultural areas, so picking strawberries and potatoes and that kind of thing.
The most of the workers is workers from abroad, Poland, and some people from Africa also.
But back to Ate. So Ate had gotten a job in a fish processing plant. It was hard work, but he did it, and he was able to save up enough money that rented his own place, passed his language exams, and ended up sort of working his way up. He now is a taxi driver, has purchased his own home, and is one of those really exemplary people that your country would love to have. We thought that it was really interesting to get those immigration stories from both sides, both somebody who's born and raised in Norway and somebody who has come from a different country. The other thing we want to talk about with Norway is taxes. We kept hearing how high taxes were in Norway and how high the cost of living was. We did find the cost of living to be higher there. Food cost more, gasoline was prohibitively expensive, electric was really cheap. So with an electric car, it's really cheap to operate. That part's wonderful. And it means that in a really cold climate, which Norway has, electric to heat your house is not prohibitive. You're going to be able to manage that. But we talked to a number of people, but especially Knut and Ate, and since you've met them, we'll share their stories with you about taxes. And both of them, hands down, quickly said, oh, we love our taxes. We are happy to pay our taxes. And I said, really? Because nobody's happy to pay their taxes. And they said, okay, well, so we're not happy to pay our taxes. We love to complain about taxes, but nobody really wants to change that system. Our taxes pay for benefits that we see every day. And it was everything from their healthcare system, education system, to some things that you and I really probably hadn't thought about until the last couple of years. And that was when everybody lost their jobs during COVID shutdowns. They had an automatic system for receiving payouts that had to do with unemployment. So their insurance, if you will, for when things go wrong is really good, and they recognize it. So they know they're gonna have good housing, they're going to have good health care, they're going to have a safety net in case that job falls through or goes wrong. I think that probably the things we were most surprised by were how aware they were of the services they got and how those services were being paid for. They understood the direct link between their taxes and the services or benefits that they received from their taxes. And they wouldn't want to change that system. They also had a relatively simple tax system. Their taxes were based on the amount that they made, like having a tax bracket that you would fit into. And if you made this much, you would pay this percentage. So it was all a ratio of how much you made versus how much you paid. And it meant that somebody who was making a lot of money was paying the same percentage as somebody who was not making as much money. And that felt fair to them. The other thing they talked a lot about, and we saw it when we went to visit Knut's house, is that there were not poor areas of town and wealthy neighborhoods. We saw houses of all varieties in every neighborhood, although I have to admit we never really saw poor housing. We never saw homes that were dilapidated to the point that they were falling down. We never saw anybody living in substandard housing. That just wasn't there anywhere in the cities or out in the country. We just didn't see that. And nobody talked about being afraid of that. Homelessness was not an issue they were worried about. If you watched our Trondheim video, we showed you how a church was managing homeless issues, and it was really more about managing substance abuse and mental health, things that could land somebody in a homeless kind of situation, although they probably weren't homeless by American standards. So I think there's a lot to think about when we talk about how countries manage their people, manage equity, manage justice. So that's the other thing. If you have ever done research on the justice systems in a variety of countries, you're going to find Norway at the top of the spectrum with regard to how they treat prisoners and their focus on rehabilitation as opposed to punishment. And I think that translates throughout their culture and throughout their society. They may not be the most warm, open. Ate would tell us that he has neighbors that he makes a point of talking to every day and inviting over for meals at his home, and they are a little bit standoffish, like, now why would we be that close all the time? But he said, you know, that's his mission, to share that part of his culture with the Norwegians. But he also mentioned that there was just a general feeling of acceptance and not wanting trouble for yourself or for others. That lack of drama, if you will, was a cultural norm across the country. We think Norway has a lot going for it, and we are really grateful to the people who were willing to sort of dive deeply into sharing some of the intimate parts of their lives and show us what life is like. And we have to say, it was really exciting to go to Knut's home, where he showed us his fruit and vegetable gardens, the flower gardens, the kids' play areas. We were able to see his lifestyle and his home that he's created for him and his family. A taxi driver is leading a really dignified life in a really good place. And that's how it should work. That feels right.
No way.
So there's lessons to be learned. Thanks for joining us in Norway. We hope that you will continue our journey through this amazing country and encourage you to check out videos from Skjolden, Geiranger, Trondheim, Honningsvåg, Flåm, Oslo, and Molde.